So I'm Steve Alaka. I'm moderating for you today. We've got an all-star exceptional panel to talk about AI and credit risk assessment. So I've been around the block for a long time, 30 plus years in traditional financial services, and then what we now call fintech across a number of companies: PayPal, Lending Club, Blue Vine, Funding Circle, before traditional financial institutions like Wells Fargo and JP Morgan. But that's enough about me. I want you to hear about these guys. So Will?
Great. Hi, I'm Will Tumblety. I'm the CEO of Rapid Finance. We're a commercial lender. We've been offering loans and lines of credit to small businesses across the U.S. for nearly 20 years. In the last year and a half, we've taken elements of our own platform, made them available to others in a software as a service format for enterprises that want to start their own small business financing enterprise.
Hi, my name is Jordan Esmond. I'm the founder and CEO of Credit Pulse. We are building a credit risk management platform for corporates, basically use alternative data, traditional data, and machine learning to help them dial in their bad debt, help them operate more efficiently.
Hey, everybody. I'm Moody Hadi. I work for S&P Global Market Intelligence. I head the new product development on basically credit analytics. So not part of the ratings or index organization. We cover actually quite a few unrated companies that are private, and we do it through basically alternative data and algorithms, and obviously some components of AI. So I'm happy to be here.
All right. So let's start with what to me seems like the elephant in the room, which is what exactly, when we say AI, what exactly are we talking about? And what's the difference between AI and Gen AI? And particularly when we're talking about credit risk, because credit risk has used models, increasingly sophisticated analytic models for a long period of time. So what is AI? How do you think about AI for the purpose of credit risk? What's already been done? How is it used today? And maybe we just start with that and go down the panel. Talk to us about what is AI for credit risk today. Will?
Yeah, so for us, we're a lender, and before AI, we were a lender, and so we did all the things that you do when you're evaluating credit risk. And this is just kind of the next evolution. It's not, we're not using a ton of generative AI. Generative AI is going and getting a bunch of data sources and coming up with new content. And it looks really cool when you've got to write a term paper or something like that. It's something you want to be pretty careful with when you're making decisions about money. And so most of the stuff that we tend to be using today that are AI-oriented are not generative AI, but more traditional, sort of following along in the machine learning kind of elements where you have a very controlled data set, you make sure you manage it, and it's curated well so that you come out with good decisions on the other end.
Awesome. Jordan?
Yeah, I would say pretty similar. AI is such a broad term, so we've been picking and choosing where the right places to apply it first within credit risk. And the first area that's been obvious to us is just machine learning. And where we've been leaning in is making it explainable as possible. We're not making the decision on the behalf of our customer, but we're helping them with a recommendation. So we've been calling it a co-pilot. So I would say that's the first place we started with AI. And probably next up for us is using it in a conversational sense where customer service, that type of use case.
And when you say your customer, helping your customer with a co-pilot, what's the customer and what's the use case that you have in mind?
So we sell to corporates, so a little different than a lending relationship. We're selling into primarily mid-market and enterprise scale manufacturing companies, and we sell into the office of the CFO. So they're just like a lender needing to make lending decisions on a daily basis. They just don't call it lending; it's business credit.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much very similar, right? So I think the only way I would kind of try to categorize the topic, I think with a bit of the contemporary hype on AI, everything's become AI basically. But I mean, the way I think about it is really like, if you think about traditional programming, you basically have a set of rules, you have a set of data, you get answers, right? With AI or machine learning, really what you have is basically answers and data, and you get rules back. So under that premise, it's kind of that's where you kind of draw the line to some degree. And then under that, you've got sort of the generative component and the non-generative facts, right? So in credit risk management, we've obviously been using machine learning quite a bit, especially for basically data extraction, for kind of pre-trained sets that basically require a lot of operations to get to basically higher accuracies, but not necessarily for decision making, right? So we, very similar to Jordan, like we inform our clients of what data we have, what is for them to ultimately make the rule or the decision. So a lot of it is really non-generative, and the components that we use that are generative are very targeted.
Okay, so Will mentioned, the use of generative is limited in credit risk, right? It's good for a term paper, maybe an 8th grade term paper, but a little bit scarier when you use it for, you're thinking about using it for actually decisioning credit. So when you think about what are the uses of generative AI that are closest in, we'll just start back the other way. So start with you, Moody. What do you think is going to be the first, the first impactful use case for generative AI for credit risk?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I think through the conference, you probably heard the same things, right? Like, so kind of being able to search or answer questions in a conversational way, right? So especially today in credit risk, right? You're going to make a decision, you see a change in a model, you want to know why that changed, and at least be able to effectively search in a smarter way. So the existing data fed back to the user in a more human fashion. So we're using it for obviously conversational components, but also summarization of credit assessments, where like if we wanted to reformat how we create our reports in a way the client wants them, they can kind of design it that way. So more or less kind of making it more human friendly without necessarily a human being in the loop. I think like some components that are a bit more, I think, upstream or like more in the pipelines, we use it for like converting business descriptions to sectors, things that are like more extraction related than they are actually influencing the model necessarily. And that the hope as things go further in this space is to control effectively for hallucinations so that we can eventually use it to create insights, or rather key kind of, if you think about a regression, key independent variables that actually do feed into the enrichment process, into the decision making. But we're not there yet, generally.
Would that be something that you could envision for automated decision making, or to assist?
Yeah. So both for automated decision making and the early warning signals, right? So both of them are kind of key themes. And today we do them kind of in a rule-based way, right? For obvious reasons, because you don't want to log into a dashboard and have like everything red, So it's very conservative to actually bring up something. But eventually, I mean, in the next few years, we hope to kind of have them actually highlight those sort of ancillary variables that cause an impact to the independent variable, right? Which is kind of, as a human, you kind of already get it, right? Because, okay, the score changed or the letter grade ranking changed, and because I get it, because this particular factor, revenue changed. But why did revenue change? So hopefully we can kind of feed that already into the system that basically helps incite those early warning signals. And and then eventually like automate the credit decision making. But most of what we've been focused on in market intelligence is really business to business transactions. So, we have to be careful, right? So we don't want to kind of have the quote unquote bot basically kind of start lending on its own.
Great.
We've been looking at it a bit like a stair-step model, where it's like, what is the right use case to start with generative AI? And there's really been two that have stuck out. I think one is similar to Moody's, which is making sense of the data that you already have and going to query against it. And why did we make this decision? Or what does this mean? And why is it connected? The second piece that, we're just starting to see, and I think there's a company here called Arva, which is using generative AI more for your data collection. So putting a bot onto the internet, collecting that data, using it in your analysis. We think that's really interesting, especially going after real-time information that's not aged like a chat GPT type model. The last piece that, we've been a little concerned about is, as generative AI generates more data, how can we tell the difference between what's human produced and what's been generated? So we expect that problem to become more extreme over time.
Why do you need to determine the difference?
it's a cycle. I think we still want human insight to be mined there, and the ability to quality control what data you're using becomes a lot harder if you don't know what the source is.
Great. Well,
So, in addition to the use cases that Jordan and Mooney were talking about, we see some companies starting to use generative AI for customer interactions. Obvious things like smarter chatbots, so they're not giving you kind of foolish answers. But other things where you can, there are companies that will take your own internal interactions with your customers. It'll comb through your notes and write other kinds of things like that, and can summarize, for instance, for a salesperson, hey, here's the past interaction that you've had with this particular client or a prospective client, right? Just makes those, it's kind of a co-pilot-like structure, but it can make your own people more effective in those kinds of interactions.
great. So what we wanted to do is dive in for a minute into what are some of the problems that are preventing us from being able to make more progress, leveraging both traditional AI and generative AI for the purpose of credit risk assessment. But before we do that, I've noticed some of these panels. You're up here, you listen to people talk. I'd love to, if there's any questions that you all have now. I have a feeling that the problem statement is going to spur some. But anybody have any questions? Got a pretty esteemed panel up here. Yeah.
I guess I'm having trouble understanding, like, in some use cases, what's new about AI and machine learning. Because, like, think about S&P, think about FICO scoring and stuff. Haven't we always been trying to use data to predict behavior? So I guess I'm struggling a little bit with how is it new? What is an AI credit model? How's that different than an S&P Moody's FICO model?
Yeah, so on the kind of rating side, right, where you have the kind of uppercase ratings, I think they use multiple different types of models. Again, I'm not part of ratings, but basically, at the end of the day, they're privy to material non-public information, right? So the analyst is standing behind it, and they have to follow after Lehman. They have to follow very rigid criteria to make that decision of a rating change. So they may or may not be using AI. I'm pretty sure they are, but it's not the only component that's making this decision, right? So, like on the kind of market intelligence side, where we're kind of more of a data analytics company, the sheer volume of companies we have to cover requires us to keep basically creating new algorithms that react to different data sets, whether they're public or private. So I think the biggest change from, I would say, traditional machine learning to AI is the fact that the computational cost has generally gone down, and the ability for them to generate responses that are useful has improved. Now, where that sits, it's not the end result, but it's kind of steps towards the end result. So we actually run a series of competing algorithms, both traditional AI-based, even regular expressions like pure rule-based, before we kind of say, hey, this is good enough to kind of be promoted to actually influence a structural model. Right.
Yeah, I would add that AI is not just for credit modeling. We actually are not using AI specifically in our credit models today. We use it for fraud modeling, which we do as a step before credit modeling in most cases. We also use it for things like automation of data entry, right? In commercial lending, you still wind up with a lot of paper forms or PDF forms. 2 years ago, we had 25 people who did a ton of data entry to do that, right? Through some combination of algorithms that we've built and third parties that we used, we've gotten that down to 2 people. And so we've taken those people, they can do more value-added work because now we can have the machine watch what the inputs are. What does that form look like? Where are the various data elements? Where do they wind up in the database after you get a training set? And then it can just take that over.
That answer the question? It's great. I mean, to me, a version of that question is probably on just about everybody's mind, right? Because if we said, if a credit lender is using, look at these guys that came out of Google and Zest Financial, they're out there creating credit models using machine learning. We've been talking about this now for, I don't know, the better part of 10 years. Is that AI? Who thinks that's AI? All right, so it's like, I don't know, maybe like a third, and some of you like slowly. So it really is. We're all trying to learn this together. It seems to me, right? And nobody's got a clear answer for what's the line between what's AI and what is just the latest iteration of advanced analytics to try to determine, in the case of credit assessment, probability of default. Right? It really makes it interesting. So if you think about whether it is the next iteration of advanced analytics to determine something like fraud, identity, or probability of default, or it's that next level that we can all agree is AI, which is the machine is actually generating content, or even more. There's a two-way experience that's happening that's iterative. Everybody can probably agree that's AI. What are the things that are preventing us? What are the problems that today are making it harder for us to make more progress, either getting to that next rung of advanced analytics, or even better, getting to something that we can all, every hand would go up, yes, that's AI. We're using AI to be able to better predict and manage risk. You guys think, what's the most impactful problem statement that's preventing us from making more progress?
I think it's a simple problem, but a really challenging solution. I think it's data. It's just the data that you collect, how you format it, how you clean it, how you link it all together is still by far and away the hardest thing that we struggle with. Model development, back testing, making it explainable, way easier than us going out and figuring out how to acquire the right data, bring it in, organize it. We spend 95% of our effort on that. And data is the hardest thing that we're facing.
And what are some of the hardest things about, what are some of the thorniest data problems?
Yeah, just, I mean, especially like if you look at, especially this group, right, you're looking at finance, like effectively private credit lending, right? Access to information that is actually relevant for credit decision to be made, right? Like a financial statement or what have you, right? Like, especially you have to think about it's not just the banks, it's also like the larger entities who are lending to the suppliers, or may not be banks, right? And they have volume of information coming in. So and that data is not clean, sometimes unaudited. Trying to kind of train something that uses that information for it to generate the right response, to be honest, isn't kind of what like the Google OpenAI have been doing, right? They've been really doing the opposite. They're going after the public domain information. So think about that same analogy, right? They're giving it public domain data, right? And then giving it answers that are probably some of my funny questions that I asked GPT, right? And saying, here's the answer, generate a set of rules. And then we end up using it for credit, right? So, I mean, I hope not. But like basically, like you kind of want to be careful, right? That although it's easily accessible to be used, I think that the kind of the way they've designed this is a bit problematic, right? Because it's so easily accessible that you can't really kind of stop folks from using it. So I think you need really good guardrails, some smart like prompt engineering. And I think the line between like what's AI and not, like it's so blurred now. Like we struggle with this on licensing, like when we've been obviously licensing data for a while. And we kind of define it as a broad thing, right? Whether it was a simple regression or a deep neural network, right? We say that's AI. So I think generally data providers will get smarter around this. And I think one learning from there is just that, for what it's worth, right? If you're able to delete the data that you used to train it, and it still is able to generate the same data that you fed it, that could be considered more AI than not, right? Whereas a regression will probably not. So, you still have to basically retrain it over and over again. But yeah, I mean, again, it's very hard to draw that line in a very specific way right now.
Yeah, so we think about it as a lender, not just data, but our own data. Right. The LexisNexis, the bureaus, right. All these giant data houses, they've got a bunch of data. They have armies of people who keep it reasonably clean. And while that data is super useful, and every lender is going to use that data is not specific to your own products, your own use cases, your channels, or the customers that you're serving. And so to build a reliable data set, you've got to have your own data, all that upfront data that's clean and organized and well maintained. And then you've got to tie it to your backend data, which contains the outcomes. Who did I approve? Who did I not approve? Who did I flag for fraud? How did they perform down the road? And ideally, you do that in real time right? So you have that data set that you can apply these kinds of algorithms to. And the problem that most organizations run into is that everybody's data is a mess. Our data is a mess, or was a mess, right? And getting all of that stuff in a usable format, importantly, that's clean enough so that you can build these kinds of algorithms that will run, and you don't have some random data analyst that's going into the data warehouse and changing some script or some ETL process that's messing something up, right? You really kind of got to organize yourself and lock that down so you have something that's reliable.
Something that might help make it real for folks. What's a specific example of a data problem that is vexing? A particularly specific use case that's challenging.
For us, it's been business entities. So what business are you actually dealing with? When we go to find a business before we make a recommendation on their credit, we'll enter their address, we'll enter their name, and we'll find too many results. We always find a result, and it'll be like 6 results, same name, 6 different addresses. And it's the owner's vacation home in Florida. It's their PO.
Multiple businesses, right?
Same business.
Same person, multiple businesses, or multiple business, multiple owners? Or single business.
Same
multiple
guy,
owners?
same business,
Yep.
6
6
records.
different records.
Different addresses. We'll have their PO box of their accounts receivable analysts. And, I think that's like the starting point. And then when you start to link in different data sources and they all look at those entities separately, it's really challenging. So that's the number one data problem we've had.
But a franchise.
No.
Yeah, we have the same exact problem, right? So like, especially private companies in the US, right? Like really trying to hone down who's actually the counterparty that you're trying to identify, right? And then this is where like we rely on, we have like 2 pipelines, one that's self-sourced and one that's basically buying data from third parties. But even when you do, it's exactly what Jordan's saying, like you're going to get a result. That's the problem, right? And you're going to get way too many results, and then really kind of trying to filter it down. So what we've done, at least in the like what we've done early on, is at least the data that we self-source, we kind of create a waterfall process after it goes through QC. And then we say, okay, if it goes through this waterfall process, if we can't find an identifier for it or a group that means sense in what we control, then just kind of right now send it to the basically generic kind of search. And then download, because again, I think it's also a bit of a technical problem because search right now, I mean, just the confidence level of a score is really dependent on the model. So if someone's confidence of 90% may equal to someone else's confidence of 60, right? So how do you kind of really agree that those are actually like comparable? So don't have an answer for that, but yeah, a lot of it is linking to begin with and really understanding corporate structure as much as you can.
So questions about anybody have any, did they capture the main points? Are there other problems that you all see that prevent us from making more progress? Yeah.
I had a question about problems.
Yeah, great.
I think that you had mentioned maybe initially that controlling for hallucinations, and there are a lot of issues that come up with regards to models and AI. Could you maybe describe some of the issues that come up that are most challenging with regards to developing and change management over models, and whether that's unique to AI versus traditional models?
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I think, okay, I'll try to answer it, right? But like, I'll give you kind of the simple example, right? Like Google search, if you go in and type anything, you're going to get a result, right? AI is where Google search is now. And that's the problem, right? Even if I basically train something on stocks and I'm going to ask it about, I don't know, about the weather, I'm going to get a response, right? And I really shouldn't. It's better to get back a response saying your question is actually not applicable, right? And it's getting better. So I think that's the point where you have to be cautious what to kind of control. And that's kind of why I kind of say like the generative AI is very much kind of cutting edge, but has these hallucinations problem. The traditional like neural networks, ML, you can control it more, right? So like, so for example, when we source business descriptions, so you go hit a website, you're going to get a business description, you're not going to get like as you know, no website's going to come and say, this is what I do exactly. They're going to describe themselves in different ways, and you run it through a series of models. And then with traditional ML, you can kind of train it to say, hey, given this, with this sector hierarchy, I can kind of might not be able to guess the lowest level, but the second lowest as good as a human does. With LLMs, you could do that, but then the risk is the few descriptions that you might get, the outliers will really be off, right? And then I control for that through basically these sort of these competing algorithms. So it'd be nice to sort of just be able to run one algo, but we're not there yet. That if I send it the wrong answer, if I send it something in French and it's turned in English, it will not give me a response, right? So eventually that's where we want to get to, but because and this is the balance, right? Because we're using effectively what's out there with Copilot, OpenAI, you're really kind of building these small language models is even more important for finance. So, yeah.
Other questions? Yeah, Nick.
So, both kind of hinted at this. Steve talked about PD, which is the ultimate determination. We talked about credit, but certainly going into that, you have kind of cash flow analytics around whether the business may survive based on their industry, their status in that industry, and I guess current economic conditions. But then you have the other side, which is probably more like character. Do you really exist? Do you have collateral? You're talking very big businesses, maybe someone like us who works with it, very easy to assess. But then when you're trying to make this mass market, I think those can actually be as hard as the cash flow, because maybe you could use, I'm sure, AI or ML to do better than a old statistical PD model, but maybe that's not the hardest. So how do you guys think about those other components of assessing? I guess somebody talked about PD with something in real time. So like, how are you guys thinking about those other components outside of cash flow credit components, and where could AI take away?
So when we're doing our lending, right, we'll do loans as low as $5,000. We'll go up to $600,000. So we're dealing with sole props, Uber drivers, right on the one end, and regional airlines in Hawaii on the other end. So it's a pretty broad spectrum that we're working with, and I think of it as pretty straightforward 3-step framework. The first one is we want to know that the entity that is applying is who they represent themselves to be, right? Both the individual as well as the business entity, right? And so that's really more of a KYB, KYC fraud screening kind of step. That's before we even get to credit, right? So once we're satisfied there, we get into credit and say, okay, is this entity, we think they are who they say they are, and now are they credit worthy? And that's when we'll get into the traditional credit matrix, like credit bureau reports and scores for the owners and cash flow analysis, and depending on the size of the loan, financial statement analysis and things like that. And then the last step is really, okay, based on that, how much are they credit worthy for? And on what kind of product? Because a good, stable small business, if you over leverage them by lending too much and they don't have the wherewithal to have the discipline to say no, you can still wind up in a bad spot. And other things like the term of the loan matter, right? Longer terms generally come with more credit risk than shorter terms. And so we have sort of this iterative process that we go through where first you do the one thing, then you do the next thing, and then you get to the last thing. That comes up with a set of offers to which that client can select which one they want to go with, and then it's like, okay, then you just go through the rest of the closing process. When I think about where and how to apply really any kind of modeling technique, we kind of do it in those steps and say, what's the place, right, for that particular thing in this step of the process?
Yeah, for us, it's a bit like kind of similar, right? Like the sheer volume of companies we're trying to cover is like in the 50 plus millions, right? So we've kind of like, if you think about the public universe, right, it's about 100,000 companies globally, right? So those, you've kind of got a lot of information around them, whether public domain or you can buy from third parties. I think when you start going into the private universe, it really depends, right? What sort of like, so we try to kind of, again, we have this concept of what's structurally creating the level of the PD, right? And then we have overlays that we add on top of it that are more, I would say, subjective, but given other peers or comps, we try to make recommendations. So if you got like for example, web traffic for the company, you know how engaged they are. If you have examples of changes in the management, they're changing the management quite often. We have that ability now. We don't like do it by default. We allow the end user to basically turn them on and off. We also have basically proprietary data, like prop data databases, where we kind of take a bit of a hands-off approach. So you can upload with your own data. You've got this between the lender and the borrower. You have this bilateral sort of closed information loop. We'll archive it for you, and we'll give you our models to score it. So that's also been very popular in that space. So they can add whatever information. We don't distribute that data anywhere at all in the systems. So
our customers are a little bit different. There's for a few reasons. We also have a 3-step model, but they're different steps. KYB is common. We have a PD, or like credit risk part, that's pretty typical. The third one is we have a behavioral score around, will they pay on time or not? Like, will they just wake up one day and just not want to pay their business credit to their vendor and keep the shipment that they just received? That happens all the time. So we built kind of that 3-step model where water flows through. Hey, if they're not a real business, then we don't need to assess their ability to go bankrupt or not, because it doesn't really matter. Yeah, I guess the only other piece I would add is, like, we've our customers have asked for us to provide a model out of the box, and they have high trust in our ability to do that. So much trust that they've asked us to make the decisions on their behalf many times. And we said, actually, we're not quite ready for that. Like, let's step into that and see how you guys make decisions first, and then we'll make sure we're doing it the right way. So a little bit, it's been tamping expectations and realities of what's going to work and what's not.
Was your third step, Jordan, there more willingness to pay?
Willingness to pay.
Interesting. Is that an area that potentially generative AI could be helpful?
Potentially. I don't know how.
Okay. All right. But we got a little bit of time left. Anybody got a burning question? Yeah.
Quick question. So, more into the business side, like over time, what you are seeing is that the tool-based decision-making, and then machine learning, and now AI, these models are able to do more and more data. From your business standpoint, you see that progress. You are providing more credit to your customers over time, and is that becoming more and more accelerated, right? As you experiment with more learning algorithms, generative AI, you provide access to very more customers.
We certainly are in the early stages, and we are seeing that. Kind of our key value proposition is we help drive down bad debt, so that actual credit risk to the corporate. But in doing so, we're also more fairly scoring small businesses that would typically be skipped over, because we're going out and acquiring data that has not typically been used in our specific niche. So we're going out and buying data from banks on these businesses that I don't think anyone else is doing today. So we're certainly able to allow credit to flow more fairly to those businesses.
Yeah, I would say what we see in our space is a lowering of the cost for acquisition, right? It's not just through AI and modeling. Certainly that's a piece of it, but also just automating process steps and things like that. And compared to the typical sort of, say, bank commercial underwriting process, right? That's very expensive. They have a lot of people doing it. Sometimes they got to go count inventory in a warehouse or write whatever kinds of things their credit policies require. But if you can lower that cost, then you can open up entire segments to more traditional lenders that have not traditionally been able to afford to really play there because their acquisition cost is too high.
So, if that is the situation, is it because of you have access to more data points, or is it because you are doing more machine learning, so you build more confidence, so you can absorb the risk? What is it? What I'm trying to ask is that, is it a result of having machine learning, or is it a result of having more data, so you increase your confidence?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally at the most basic place, it's because you are acquiring more data and using that data effectively, where traditional institutions are simply not, then you get better at that over time through things like machine learning and applying AI algorithms, just like you would to any other element of your business. But I think about for a long time, it's been very efficient to do consumer lending because the credit bureaus have had very thorough data sets that are pretty comprehensive. That's not the case with small business. Even just knowing the idea of who the small business is based on the EIN, until very recently, you couldn't find coverage where you could get 100% of the EINs issued by the IRS. You'd maybe find 60, 65% coverage, right? Because the IRS just wouldn't give that information out. So it just makes the data problem much more challenging. And so you have to be able to sift through a lot of data, understand how it connects together in order to trust the data, in order to make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like from our customer base, that's why they use us, right? We basically are able to buy data in volume, right? And then effectively process it more efficiently to kind of service them, right? So, like, no, I don't think we're very few customers who can kind of emulate the amount of data S&P has, right? So we are able to buy it and effectively think of it as a mutualization, right? And that's kind of the lately with this trend in AI, we see that coming up a lot. And then a lot of customers are saying, can I use your data that you're giving me in AI within my systems? And that's where we kind of get into this sort of that line. Is it derived data or is it basically just summarization of existing information, right? So yeah, like more data, being able to process it more efficiently, still with a human, mind you, right? It's not necessarily replacing the human all the time, but at least like, in a funny way, you're trading labor costs for computational cost, right? That's really what the game is, right? And the computational cost is like getting higher and higher, right? That's why you see like Google, Microsoft, right? And then Amazon, like only few big players who can afford the computational cost kind of play there, not necessarily smaller startups. So.
Great. So I think we have time for one more kind of parting thoughts from each from each of you. Let me ask the question this way, and then leave it open to you how you answer it. If there was just one thing that could help to solve some of the problems, the data, largely data, or other problems that we discussed so far, or one thing that could make the biggest difference in being able to be more effective assessing and managing risk for small businesses, what would that one thing be? Will?
Yeah, so I'd say start by getting your own data house in order. The rest of it, you will either learn or you can hire somebody to do it, right? Building the models and all that kind of stuff. The hard part is getting your own data organized and keeping it clean. We actually started tackling this ourselves like 8 years ago. And most people, I think, tackle it by trying to say, I'm going to have data stewards, I'm going to have data warehouses, I'm going to do all this kind of stuff. We tried that. It didn't work. So we actually built a system to do it. Right. So we have a production system that does nothing but keep track of all this data. And we don't let people get in there. We keep them out.
Great.
Jordan? Smart. The number one thing in my mind is a product question, which is like, I think folks just need to understand that AI and machine learning is a tool, but not a solution. But where it becomes valuable is if you pick the right problem to solve. And I don't know, maybe it's just the pessimist in me, but I think there's a lot of like people picking the wrong problem to solve and applying AI to it. And I think companies, people can do a lot better. And if you think critically about, is this the right problem to solve? And then grab for the right tool, which may or may not be AI, I think we'll be a lot better off and everyone will be happier.
Do you have a problem in mind, a specific problem in mind that you think is best suited?
I think I see a lot in like fundraising announcements for startups where it's like, we're going to automate, A to Z of every single piece of the decisioning process in lending. Let's just we'll say in that realm. But in reality, like, I'm glad they raised money, but let's be realistic about like, what is it going to be valuable for within the next 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years, maybe in 5 years.
Okay, great. Moody?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much similar to Jordan, right? Like, because I think, like, even with a large company like S&P, like a lot of times it's kind of a solution with no problem that needs to be solved. Like We're basically just putting it in there because it's contemporary, it's in vogue, I think there are really strong implications, right, from what we just talked earlier about, like hallucinations, where you apply it, how you apply it. In a way, like you think of Excel, right? Like I'm sure at some point Excel had its own chief Excel officer, right? I mean, I think as kind of time, which sounds funny now, right? Like, but as time goes by, I think we start actually wrapping our heads around where AI gets used, and that becomes more sort of in the vernacular rather than basically just kind of the new hottest calculator, right? But we're learning kind of by, I think the feeling is we're learning by accident because the speed of processing from the large tech companies is pretty fast. So they keep updating with newer and newer data sets, and I don't know what GPT-4 plus something's coming out soon, right? I'm sure, I think that's why everybody's just trying to keep up with basically what they're training it on, effectively public domain data, right? So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for hanging in there with us. I think this was a wonderful panel discussion. Thank you all three for your time today. And thanks everybody for your engaging questions.